6 ancient structures, 6 different cultures, 6 different locations across Europe, the oldest built more than 5,000 years ago. Princeton University researchers visited the first one in 1994. They were not looking for anything anomalous. They brought standard acoustic measurement equipment, entered the interior of a 5,200-year-old Irish passage tomb called Newgrange, and documented the ambient resonance of the chamber. The dominant resonant frequency was 110 Hz. They tested a second site in Scotland, 110 Hz, a third in England, 110 Hz. By the time they had tested 6 megalithic sites across Europe, every single one clustered in the same narrow band, 95 to 120 Hz, with the dominant peak at 110. This was not random. The probability of 6 independently constructed stone structures, built by different cultures in different centuries, using different materials, achieving identical acoustic resonance by chance approaches 0. These buildings were tuned. Someone knew what they were building toward. The question nobody has fully answered is what they were trying to do with it. Acoustic archaeology is a legitimate, peer-reviewed field that has been active since the early 1990s. It studies the relationship between ancient built environments and sound, specifically which frequencies a structure amplifies, which it absorbs, and whether those properties appear to be intentional. The foundational work on megalithic acoustic resonance was conducted through Princeton's Peer Laboratory, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, and later extended by Dr. Aaron Watson, an archaeologist and acoustic researcher based in the United Kingdom. Watson's methodology was straightforward. He carried calibrated audio equipment into ancient stone chambers, generated tones at precise frequencies across the full spectrum, and measured the response of the structure itself. The results were consistent and repeatable. Every chamber he tested responded most strongly to frequencies between 95 and 120 Hz, with 110 Hz emerging as the structural sweet spot, the frequency at which the stone walls, floor and ceiling of these chambers collectively amplify rather than dampen sound. For reference, 110 Hz sits roughly at the bottom of the baritone vocal range. It is the frequency produced by a low resonant male voice, the kind of sustained vocalization that appears in ritual chanting traditions across cultures on every inhabited continent. It is achievable with the human voice and achievable with low-frequency percussion instruments like drums. What it is not is accidental. Chamber resonance is a product of precise dimensional ratios, the relationship between interior height, wall curvature, passage dimensions, and total enclosed volume. To produce a specific resonant frequency, those ratios must be engineered deliberately. You cannot build a stone chamber that resonates at 110 Hz by stacking rocks in an approximate circle. The geometry has to be exact. The builders had to know, before they began construction, what frequency they were targeting. That means they understood acoustic physics. 5,000 years before acoustic physics was a formal discipline. Understanding why this matters requires a brief detour into neuroscience. In 2008, a study published in the peer-reviewed journal Time and Mind examined the neurological effects of sustained exposure to 110 Hz resonance on human subjects. The findings were unambiguous. 110 Hz measurably induces theta wave activity in the human brain. Theta waves are the neural oscillation pattern that characterizes deep meditative states, trance, hypnagogic consciousness, the liminal zone between wakefulness and sleep, and heightened states of suggestibility and emotional receptivity. They occur naturally during certain stages of dreaming, during experienced meditation, and during the neurological states associated with religious or ritual experience across cultures. Theta state is not a minor variation in consciousness. It represents a fundamentally different mode of brain operation. Information processed in theta state bypasses the normal critical filtering mechanisms of the frontal cortex. Experiences in theta state tend to be encoded differently in long-term memory. The brain in theta is more open, more porous, more susceptible to both insight and influence. You cannot reliably induce theta state in a person without either extended training, sensory deprivation, chemical assistance, or sustained exposure to the right external stimulus. 110 Hz is that stimulus. Now layer in the physical design of these chambers. Newgrange, the home of Papa Westray in Orkney, Wayland's Smithy in Oxfordshire. They are all built to eliminate external light. You enter through a narrow passage, the light disappears within feet of the entrance, and the interior is sealed in complete darkness. The architecture of sensory deprivation is built in from the beginning. No light, constant enclosed ambient resonance, a sustained low-frequency vibration passing through the stone floor into the bodies of anyone sitting or lying within. Within minutes, a person in these conditions is in theta state, whether they intend to be or not. This was the design, not a side effect, not a coincidence. The acoustic and visual architecture of these chambers work together to produce a specific neurological outcome in the human beings inside them. The builders understood what they were engineering, and they built it into stone that they expected to stand for thousands of years. If the acoustic properties of these structures were accidental, a byproduct of certain stone shapes that happened to resonate at similar frequencies, you would not expect to find evidence of active tuning. You would not expect modifications made after initial construction specifically designed to correct resonance. At Newgrange, that is exactly what researchers found. Newgrange is one of the most thoroughly documented prehistoric structures in the world. Its construction has been analyzed in detail. Every stone cataloged, every joint measured, every structural element cross-referenced against comparable sites. When acoustic archaeologists analyzed the chamber with this level of precision, they identified something significant. Certain stones in the interior had been added after initial construction. They are not original to the primary build phase. They do not serve structural functions. The chamber would stand without them. They are not decorative. Their placement does not correspond to any visual or artistic logic, but their placement does correspond precisely to acoustic logic. If you built a stone chamber that resonated at a frequency slightly above 110 Hz, say 118 or 120, and you wanted to bring the dominant resonance down to exactly 110, these are the modifications you would make. Added mass at specific wall positions changes the effective resonance of the enclosure. The stones that were retrofitted at Newgrange are placed at exactly the positions where they would produce that correction. The builders went back. They measured or sensed that the chamber's resonance was not quite right, and they fixed it. Dr. Watson documented this analysis in published work. It is not disputed on the archaeological record. What is disputed is the interpretation, whether it represents intentional acoustic tuning or coincidental structural additions for other purposes. But the physical evidence is clear. Specific stones were added at specific positions that happened to correct the acoustic profile of the chamber with precision. Coincidence is not a satisfying explanation for deliberate-looking modifications that produce exactly the acoustic outcome we see. The simpler explanation is that the builders knew what they were doing, noticed a deficiency, and corrected it. The most remarkable data point in this entire investigation is not from Ireland or Scotland or England. It is from a completely separate cultural tradition, constructed in a completely separate location, by people who had no documented contact with the megalithic builders of northwestern Europe. It is called the Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, and it sits on the island of Malta. The Hypogeum was discovered in 1902 during excavation for a housing development. Workers broke through the ceiling of an underground chamber and found a 3-level subterranean complex carved entirely out of solid limestone bedrock. The deepest level sits approximately 11 meters, roughly 35 feet, below the surface. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Estimates based on the human remains found within it suggest it was used for burials over a period spanning roughly 1,000 years, beginning around 3,600 BCE, completely sealed from the external environment. No daylight, no surface sound. 35 feet of solid limestone overhead. One chamber in the Hypogeum is designated the Oracle Room. In one wall of this room, at a precise height of approximately 50 centimeters, there is a niche, a carved alcove about the size of a small window, cut into the limestone with a smooth, deliberate finish. When a person projects a low, sustained vocal tone into this niche, the resonance propagates through the entire underground complex. Every connected chamber fills with sound simultaneously. Researchers from the University of Malta measured the resonant frequency of the Oracle Room using the same methodology applied at the Irish and British sites. The result, 110 hertz. Not approximately 110, not 108 or 115. The documented resonant peak of the oracle room in the Maltese Hypogeum is 110 hertz. The same frequency, independently achieved by a different culture in a different medium, 11 meters underground, separated from Newgrange by more than 1,000 miles and several centuries. The UNESCO assessment of the Hypogeum notes the unusual acoustic properties. It notes the specific frequency. It does not explain how a Neolithic culture, with no documented acoustic theory and no known contact with the Northwestern European megalithic tradition, produced an underground chamber optimized to the same precise frequency. That absence of explanation in the official record is the most telling detail in this entire investigation. Here is what the documented evidence establishes, stripped of speculation. 6 megalithic structures across Europe, spanning a construction window of several centuries, all resonate between 95 and 120 hertz, with a dominant peak at 110 hertz. This is measured. It is published. It is not contested. Sustained exposure to 110 hertz resonance demonstrably induces theta wave activity in human subjects. This is documented in peer-reviewed neuroscience literature. The acoustic properties of these chambers are not byproducts of generic stone construction. They require precise dimensional engineering. They represent knowledge of the relationship between physical geometry and sound that is not accidental. At least one of these structures, Newgrange, was modified after initial construction specifically to correct its resonance profile. The modifications are documented archaeologically. The Maltese Hypogeum, a completely independent structure from a completely independent cultural tradition, achieves the same resonant frequency in a completely isolated underground environment. What this adds up to is a pattern of deliberate acoustic engineering, applied across multiple cultures, multiple centuries, and multiple locations, aimed at producing a specific effect in the human beings who entered these spaces. The honest question is not whether this was intentional. The physical evidence makes the case for intentionality far stronger than the case against it. The honest question is what this tells us about what these people knew. They knew that specific physical spaces could alter human consciousness. They knew the frequency that achieved this. They knew how to engineer it in stone. And they built structures designed to deliver that effect that have now been standing for more than 5,000 years. Modern neuroscience confirmed in 2008 what these builders appear to have known in 200 BCE. We are not ahead of them in this particular understanding. We may have simply rediscovered something they already knew and chose to build into permanent architecture. What else did they know? And what were they using these altered states for? The chambers don't answer that, but they ask it clearly in a frequency your nervous system was designed to receive. Next week, we move from chambers designed to alter your mind to a structure designed for something else entirely. A structure so precisely engineered that its builders would have needed tools and knowledge we still cannot fully account for. 4.5 million tons of stone, a central chamber with a coffer that resonates at exactly 440 hertz, concert pitch. Granite that is 55% quartz and behaves like a piezoelectric crystal under pressure. The Great Pyramid was not a tomb. Not a single body was ever found inside it. Subscribe. The evidence is not what you were taught.